Welcome back, listening audience, to another Guns and Mental Health podcast. Today we are interviewing Jerah Hutchins. Hello, Jerah.
Hello.
All the way from, you're in, whoa, I almost screwed that up. Are you in Dallas still? Fort Worth-ish?
Yeah, it's DFW area. I live in a little, like a smaller town called Grapevine that's like right by the DFW airport. Yeah, if you said
Good
Dallas
fine.
Fort Worth, I wouldn't get offended. It's fine.
Yeah. So we've got Jerah from Dallas, Fort Worth, Grapevine area. Mike and I are here, and we haven't done one of these interviews in a while. We've switched formats a little bit to center on and emphasize the counseling, psychological end of things with our clinician team. But I'm excited because Jerah is one of my favorite people in the gun community. I know her a little. I like her a lot, and I'm excited to chat. But Mike, how have you been? It's been a minute.
I've been good, man. I've just been trying to, you were over at the house. You saw how unpacked it was, moved into this new place. So I've been trying to set up things. I finally got my studio going, which is good. But besides that, everything's fine. Same old, same
Good.
old.
Glad to hear it. Yeah. But let's not make it about us. Let's make it about Jerah. So,
Yes.
Jerah, introduce yourself to our audience and tell us why you're on this show and what you do in life.
Oh man, I am I'm a Second Amendment actionist. We talked about that before
That
the show.
word, yeah, actionist.
There you go.
Actionist and not advocate. I'm a firearms trainer. I've been a trainer for 15 years. Um, I do a lot of speaking engagements about women in the Second Amendment, how we need to get better involved. I testify at some hearings every now and then when I see them coming. And then I met you guys. I think I met Mike at SHOT Show. I think we had dinner at that place that had that. What was that freaking duck soup that was like $200 or some ridiculous?
It was in the Venetian, right? We were in the
I
Venetian.
think so. And
No, we
Chris
were in the
Chang
Plaza.
was with
It was the
us.
Plaza, right?
Yeah, Noir and Chang were with us, and
And Rob Pincus. Yeah, it
was
was like a
there.
who's who at the table.
And I met, yeah, I was like the only one that just like I didn't have a platform at that time. I was just there. And then I met Jake. Where did I meet you, Jake? Was it Train and Learn in person?
Actually, in person, the first time we met was December of 21 when you were out here for one of Rob's courses for instructors,
Oh, that's
and
right.
we
Yeah,
had done a little pinging online. But that was the time that we first filmed we did our very first part three or level three course, and so we were at Reno Guns and Range. And if I recall correctly, you had recently been hit by a truck or something.
okay, let me tell you. Okay, let me tell you this story. Okay, because I don't think I ever told Mike this story. So Rob was like, "Hey, I was very fine being in the like beginning space of teaching people how to shoot guns. Like the beginning space, the basic space is where I shine. Just teaching people nomenclature, grip, stance, shot, sight picture, trigger pull, all that stuff. I loved it. And then I met Rob at the 2A rally in DC, and he was like, "You're not going to do that anymore. I want you to I want you to teach IDS, this intuitive defensive shooting thing." And I'm like, "I don't teach that. I'll take it, but I don't teach that because I don't have like I'm not an operator. I'm not a combat person. Like what business do I have teaching it?" And he was like, "You're going to do it." So he just right, like Rob does, and gets me to Reno. Well, so that happened in 2020 in November, right after Thanksgiving. So I was supposed to fly out the Sunday, right? Thanksgiving's on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I'm supposed to fly out Sunday. I got hit by an 18 wheeler the day before Thanksgiving. And I had 4 broken ribs on this side. I had 3 fractured ribs on this side. And I had a black bruise that went literally from the bottom of my butt cheek on my left side all the way down the back of my leg to my ankle. I couldn't walk on my leg for 2 days. And so I
Jeez.
called Rob. It was a really, really bad. And the guy, and frankly, when the ambulance showed up, they said, I didn't even go to the hospital, right? They just automatically call one. And I had to get my whole side of my whole driver's side of my Jeep was smashed up. I had to crawl out the passenger side, and but they all said I should have been dead because I got hit like he drifted into my lane and clipped the back of my Jeep, and I spun around and I hit the median on a major highway in Dallas head on, and then he smashed into me, right?
Wow.
And so they were like, you should pretty much not be among the living right now. And so I wake up on Thanksgiving Day. I can't get out of bed, right? Because I was like, I'm not bleeding. It's fine, whatever. So I call Rob and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make this class because I got hit by an 18-wheeler. And he goes, huh. He was like, well, did you go to the hospital? And I was like, no. And he goes, well, maybe you should just see if you can fly and just still come. I was like, okay, maybe you didn't hear what I just said, right? He was like, oh, just go get checked out, right? So I go to this urgent care place. I'm self-employed, right? So I don't have any insurance. So I go to this urgent care place and I pay for x-rays. And that's when I understand the extent of my injuries. But the doctor was like, you don't have any internal bleeding or anything like that I can see. And I was like, so could I fly on an airplane? I don't know, like Sunday? And he is like, I mean, you could, but I don't know why you would want to. And I was like, well, you don't know Rob Pincus.
Right.
So I got my ass on an airplane on Sunday and started the class Monday. I couldn't even sleep sitting down. One of my best friends, Corey, lives in Reno. So I stayed at his house and I had to sleep in a recliner in the living room and take this class. And so to Rob's point, it wasn't a physical class. It was really more of a mental class, right? Teaching people how to teach, this skill. And there were a few shooting drills that I didn't really take part in. But that class has a 50% fail rate. So somehow I passed this class and then Rob's like, oh, I told you it would be fine. And I was like,
That's a pretty intense course because I was sitting in there just listening because we were doing our thing for WTTA. And I somebody had asked me, like, what do you think? And I go, I don't, it's like the Matrix.
It's mentally exhausting because this isn't like a multiple choice test at the end. You have to write an essay. You have to write out your answers. You have to get up in class and actually teach parts of the class. It was mentally exhausting and I wasn't getting good sleep because I couldn't really sleep laying down. And it was just really mentally exhausting. So I had to by day 3, because it was a 5-day course at the time. By day 3, I was like, I've really got, I can't have any more social interactions with people. I've got to go home and study or I'm not going to pass this class. And then day 4, literally the day before the end, there were 3 dudes that straight up walked out. And I was like, where are you going? And they're like, we don't get this. We can't, basically it's such a deep dive into how you actually teach somebody how to shoot a gun and the science behind it and the vocabulary behind it. Because a lot of people, and then I started to recognize that when people are teaching other people how to shoot, they're using words that don't mean what they think they mean. And so you learn that in the class and you're really just literally scaling it down like onion, like garlic, and you're taking off all these little jackets and you're getting down to the core of what it really means to teach somebody how to shoot. It was exhausting. And so I'm like, these guys are walking out. I'm like, where are you going, wusses? And they're like, we just don't get it. And so you start to recognize it has nothing to do with being male or female or tougher or not tougher. What you really start to understand is how people don't really understand what they're doing, so they can't teach it, right? So it's they don't understand how to explain adequately to another person how to do what they can physically do. And then you start to recognize people that have no business being teachers.
So 2 things. One, thank you for correcting me. It was December of 20, and I can't believe it was that long ago. And then 21 is when we met at Train and Learn. We actually got to talk. But that course, so what we were doing there for WTTA was filming our very first intro course. That's what we did for Cassette. But I, like Mike, sat in on that last, I don't know, 2 hours or hour and a half, the debrief on the last day. And listening to the frustrations and the actual struggle of the students trying to articulate what had gone on while Rob is just sitting up there like non-attached, parrying and thrusting with his own philosophies and uses of words. I had this tumblers click into place moment where I was like, this guy's really good. And it reminded me of counseling, quite honestly, when we're not teaching people, a formulaic approach to helping others. We're teaching them how to think on their feet so that regardless of what walks in, you can deal with it. And it's just a different level of intellect. It's a different level of personal self-evaluation, humility, and it clicked. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I realize what's going on here. This is brilliant. Like this is really genius work." And I can understand. I totally empathize with the people who are frustrated with it because they wanted to be handed a formulaic approach, a bunch of check boxes on how to teach people how to shoot. And he's like, "It's not about that. It's about you knowing how to teach other people how to shoot, and they're all going to be different. So you have to be as different as everyone else." And it was like they just couldn't get it. So
It
kudos
wasn't
to you
even
for
about,
sticking with it.
yeah,
It's
100%. It wasn't even, but it wasn't really even about teaching people how to teach people how to shoot. It was about teaching people how to understand teaching people how to shoot. Like, do you really understand what you're teaching someone to do? And if someone questions, not, and this was the biggest thing, if someone questions what you're teaching, can you explain the why? Can you explain the science behind it? Can you explain why your pinky levels out a gun? Can you explain why your thumb has to be up when you get into grip? Like the why behind all of it. It was a wonderful class. It had nearly nothing to do with physical capability and everything to do with your mental capacity to expand your vocabulary and or dumb it down for somebody who doesn't have one.
Do
right.
you
Truly
find
meeting people
yourself
where they were.
using it? Do you because you said when you first started you just wanted to do like the simple way of teaching people. Do you find yourself using now a lot of the things? Have you accelerated that next level where it's like this is my lane now?
I do a little bit of both. I do less advanced teaching. I still do plenty of intro. I was in my head, I was thinking that I was doing this great service because I was getting people, mostly women, ready for advanced training the right way. I felt like I was doing it the right way. I felt like they could come to me, they could be comfortable with me as a woman, they could see that somebody had mastered this skill. And really, the big part of the biggest part of me wanting to touch all of these women with this education was so that I could tell them, you can't do your whole journey with me because it doesn't make sense. Because who is your, my experience is limited. Who is your aggressor likely to be? Me or you? Me or a guy? Right? So unless you train with men, so I was really proud of being able to make women confident enough to move on to advanced training that I had already taken and could speak to. And I could speak for that, that instructor that was, I was like, this person's going to take care of you. This person's going to be, give you knowledge, and I trust this person. But really what happened was I learned that I wasn't preparing them enough. There was stuff that I was missing that that was a little bit backwards, that they were going to have to be retaught in the advanced space. So I was actually doing them a disservice. And I think that's the point that Rob was trying to make to me. And that's what I realized going through the class. Is this is not it's, especially even if you're doing it part-time, and I was teaching guns full time, I was one of the busiest instructors I knew. Like I taught 247 licensed to carry classes in 2021. Everybody was
Wow.
freaking out. I was teaching one almost every day, and that didn't include one-on-one intro lessons. That didn't include any IDS stuff that I was doing after the 2020, lesson. I was busy. And it was a very, it was super heavy. And then on top of that, to get back to the mental health aspect of it, I was, people were coming to me and explaining to me why they wanted to learn this skill, and it was heavy. It was really heavy. So yes. So I teach more advanced stuff now than I did before, but I don't know that I would necessarily call it my like quote unquote lane.
I really appreciate you sharing that because I think there's a lot we can take away from the idea that you can think you know something pretty well, and then in order to gain greater wisdom, insight, expertise, you have to unlearn some stuff in order to relearn it properly with the intentionality. So I think a lot of people just lack intentionality. They memorize things, they go through processes and procedures, they do drills, but they don't necessarily have the intentionality. And it sounds like that's what you're now learning, not only about yourself, but about how to communicate to others so that they are in better charge of knowing why they do what they do, not just to do it.
Oh, I was kind of an asshole about it. I was like, I don't need to do anything more than what I'm doing. I have mastered what I am doing. And then I learned that I had actually not mastered what I was doing. And another thing that I saw in that class too was there were a lot of people that would just regurgitate someone else's thought. And they had no free thinking or critical thinking skills of their own to go, maybe this can be done a different way. Maybe I should try it a different way. Maybe I should really think about how I should explain this to someone instead of just saying it the same way that this other person says it, and that
So
was a big deal too.
it's so the same in counseling when we're trying to train up graduate students or interns or even our professional colleagues who've been doing it a really long time. It's like, that's cool that you've been doing this a really long time, but do you have variety? Are you integrated? Can you teach somebody else how you're doing it? It's like, why can't Michael Jordan go coach a team? He's just naturally gifted. There's people who are much better coaches who never achieved any level of athletic success because they were too busy studying it, right? They weren't naturals at it. But yeah, the general application, everything. I'm thinking now, church too, like religion. When you're teaching religion and religious doctrine and scripture, the theology behind it is so much more important than just repeating prayers or bumper sticker phrases, right? Thanks for sharing that. That's really cool.
Oh man, it's
So,
you think about you brought religion into it, and I want to kind of touch on something really quick when we talk about because women in this space, women in the gun space, women in the mental health space, obviously we're dealing sometimes with some different issues, and one of the ways that I heard this explained, and it really just blew my mind, was that we take the word submission and we throw this negative connotation on it in relationships, right? Like a woman is supposed to submit to the man and all this stuff. And the way that I heard it explained, and I don't know if it's correct, I'm just going to go ahead and preface it by saying I don't know if it's correct, but I do know it makes sense to me. And so when I'm teaching women when I'm teaching women self-defense and how it pertains to their kids, and sometimes I'll have women that say, well, my husband takes care of that. Like my husband is the protector and he should, take care of that. And then I have to point out that you're not together, all the time. And then I have to point out the statistic of women are with children more. Okay. We're with children more, but we're also the easier target. Okay. So statistically, we are the easier target, but we are also technically more likely to have to physically protect children than men. Okay. That's out there. Okay. But so when you take your main focus as a mom, your main focus is religiously, right? A nurturer. You're supposed to be a nurturer. But you're also supposed to be a ferocious protector of your children. So is that not your submission as a mom to first be a nurturer? Your first mission is to be a nurturer, and your husband or the father's first mission is to be a provider. But is not your submission to be a protector when he cannot be there to be a protector? Mind blown.
really good, really good, really good. You've been
Totally.
training for, I don't understand. You've been training for 15 years when you're like 26.
Yeah, I turned 41 this year, so I'm getting on up there. I hiked Pikes Peak from bottom to top a couple of weeks ago in Colorado. And as sure as the Lord Jesus lives, he did remind me the next day that I am 41 and not 21.
So how did you get started in this industry? Because a lot of people will have it as a hobby and everything like that, but then you become like a regular figure. Like people know your name and they know who you are. I mean, you said you didn't have a platform before, but now you definitely have a platform. Like everyone knows who you are. So
Yeah, when you start opening your big mouth, you'll get a platform.
yeah, that works.
Tell me about it.
So the story is, I was a shooter growing up. I was actually a competition 3-gunner growing up, and my grandfather was an immigrant from Sicily and like fell in love with the Second Amendment when he came here, and so guns everywhere. And so I've been shooting for 30 years. Uh, and then when I was in my early 20s, I was still competing, but I got a blood clot in my dominant eye, so I was right. And because of that blood clot, and it took them a while to figure out what it was. So some doctors thought I had multiple sclerosis, but we ended up figuring out it was just a blood clot in my eye. So literally within a few days, I became left eye dominant. And it really affected my ability to compete. And so if I wanted to compete, and I was really bummed about it too, because I was pretty good. And so I had to then kind of take on this obstacle of, how do I still compete or be, any kind of effective in the shooting space with, this dominance issue. And so I had to really hunker down and take like 6 months to learn how to shoot long guns left-handed. And it actually ended up being really awesome because I have some, now there's some, pros and cons to it, obviously, but I became really efficient with long guns left-handed, but I could still run a pistol right-handed, no problem, because I shoot with both eyes open when I shoot a pistol. Okay. And so it really became cool because it made me ambidextrous with a pistol. So I can run a pistol left-handed or right-handed. I'm faster right-handed, but I'm more accurate left-handed, right? So when I started taking classes, like really advanced classes that would simulate injury, it was super easy for me to take my right hand and put it behind my back and run a pistol left-handed. It was awesome. Okay. But then it's also awesome when you're running 2 platforms at once. I sling a long gun on my left side and I put a pistol on my right, so I'm not running over the platforms to get to them. Right? My sling isn't getting stuck, right, in my pistol holster or any of that stuff. I have them slung on either side, and I can just run them how I run them. So it actually ended up being more of a benefit than an obstacle, at the end of the day. But when I was going through that, I started teaching more than competing, right? So sometimes a mediocre or just a slightly above average athlete is actually a really good coach. So I started coaching people and started taking people to the range. And in the middle of all this stuff, I ended up having a weird guy that stalked me. And so I really started to get more into defensive pistol than competition pistol. But at that time, so this was, 15 years ago, and you didn't see a lot of women going to the gun range alone. You didn't see a lot of women in competition. You didn't see a lot of women being instructors. So it was like this whole, like, I got a lot of attention when I went to the gun range by myself. And so people would come up and ask me questions. RSOs would come up and ask me if I needed help. I never really got offended by that because you just didn't see a lot of women in that space yet. And so you wanted to make sure they were safe. I never got offended by that. But there were women that would come with their husbands or their dads or something, and they would come and ask me questions like, how did you get to the point where you got so comfortable coming to the range by yourself? And I would just kind of talk to them about that. And then it kind of clicked in my brain that, maybe we do need some more female representation in the instructor space. So I started taking instructor classes and just kind of learning how to teach people. And then it started out as a side business, and then I went full-time with it in 2017.
And that's not all you do, though. You're still doing the cigar bar and the whiskey lounge?
Yeah. So when COVID happened, not when COVID happened, actually, it was the year before that. When we got constitutional carry in Texas, I got slaughtered in the media because I was an instructor that was pro constitutional carry. And I got, messages on Facebook and emails and, people hating on me and telling me that I didn't care about my community because I was pro constitutional carry. And then I was like, I'm sorry, you're an old white guy that can't pivot his business. That's not my problem. I think maybe you forgot that we were in this game for freedom from the beginning. And then when these laws passed, we capitalized off of that because we're business people. But we have to remember that freedom is the name of the game. Right. But I was concerned that my business would take a hit. And so I felt like I needed to pivot and invest in other things that would also make me money just in case. My business did not take a hit. I did own a cigar lounge and bar over in East Texas for a couple of years. And it was awesome. And so I just said to myself, maybe I just need to start making money on all the things I love. And so I got into the restaurant space for a while, and I love food and I love whiskey and I love cigars and I love guns. And so I just I was like, I did all that in about a year and a half and kind of just like dipped my toe into a bunch of different stuff. And now I'm super happy and I live a great life filled with guns and whiskey and steak.
You just reminded me of when Johnny Depp, I can't remember the movie, where he's like, I love whiskey, baseball. He names off all these like things, and he's like, and you, What movie am I talking about? He's like a gangster.
You said Guns, Whiskey, Baseball?
He says something like that. She's like, "Tell me about yourself," or whatever, and he's like, "I like whiskey, I like baseball." Like
I'm
he just
Googling
names
it
off
right
these like
now.
real manly things.
Who
I'm
was it?
Googling it right now, 'cause that's
Who's the
actually.
actor?
It's Johnny Depp.
Oh, all I could think was Kevin Costner's character in uh, Bull Durham when he goes off that list and he's all opinionated and Susan Sarandon just swoons.
Didn't she, though?
Yeah, Johnny
She's
Depp
pretty
says
good
something
looking
like, "I like
now.
fast cars, baseball."
I can't. Nope, it's
They're just
nothing's
trying to
coming
look it
up.
up.
We'll
Yeah,
get to it. Nothing's
And
getting
yeah,
there's,
up.
and there's people listening to this going, how could you guys not remember this?
exactly.
Because we're in the middle of the show. That's why. All right. So you're on top of all that, you're an advocate, not an activist, an actionist, we will say. And to parse the words, I'm not a big fan of activism because to me, activism is an emotional outlet for people whose anger is papering over some other more vulnerable emotion like disappointment. Like if I'm sad that Congress isn't doing the right thing, I'm going to get pissed and then I'm going to take my picket sign down to the steps of the Capitol building and wave my picket sign on a Sunday and chant and have beers with my friends afterward and think that I quote unquote did something. That's not You're not doing anything. There's a time and place for marches and for rallies for sure. But what it does is it just displaces the anger away from the disappointment. Action, however, and advocacy takes effort. And that effort is in the form of real, actual sacrifice. Usually it's multiple hours of a day, multiple days, time off of work to go down and actually speak or even run for office or influence people throughout the community to change their minds. This is what we're doing with Walk the Talk America, right? We're actually taking time to create training courses and literature and media that we distribute. That's action. You take action in a lot of these realms. You're pro freedom and you never forgot that. You didn't just lose the ability to center on the idea of liberty simply because your business needed sustaining based on series of policies or whatever, right? And now we've got we've got all sorts of attacks on the Second Amendment coming from all sorts of angles with people who are much better funded usually than our own advocacy efforts. So tell us about some of the most recent stuff that you've done, but also maybe paint the picture about how you got a belly full of fire to even do that in the first place. Because I and to frame this, go to Jerah's Instagram and look up one of her reels where she's on a panel and she does a straw poll survey from the crowd. She asks a series of questions and people slowly sit down with every question she asks and nobody's left standing at the end. And she's like, how can you guys be here talking about how you're pro Second Amendment and you don't do any of the things that I just listed off? And they're pretty basic stuff. There's not a lot of heavy lifting going on there, but you're a fierce defender of liberty broadly. Tell us how you got into that and what your maybe some of your favorite accomplishments are and some recent efforts.
I got a lot of flack for that video. Got a lot of flack for that video.
Did you
Uh,
really?
yeah, and I was on a panel that was literally this year in like June. We did that. I did a panel with the Pew Pew Jew. Yehuda was on that panel. That was actually put on by the Dallas Jewish Conservative Group. And so they had a mental health expert who was a Jewish doctor. They had a sergeant that I served with in the Guard who was the moderator for that panel. And then John Burke, I don't know if you know who he is. But he was Michael knows who he is. He was a combat veteran, has the All American Savage show. I actually went on John Burke's show before we did that panel. And we talked about a lot of stuff. And so I got a lot of flack for that because, I started doing that. I did a women's, I was the keynote speaker at the Georgetown Republican Women's Group. And that's when I started that. And I don't know how it just literally came to me. It wasn't a part of my original presentation, but there was 60 women in that room who were all conservatives, a lot of water cooler talk before I took the stage about, mama bear and protecting my kids, and all that stuff. And so I was like, well, we're going to see how prepared you are to protect the kids. And so I asked him to stand. Here's the questions that I asked. I asked him to stand, and I said, if you know what the Second Amendment is for, remain standing. And everybody stay standing. And so then I put a microphone in this lady's face, and I was like, what's the Second Amendment? And she said the right to keep and bear arms. I was like, okay. I was like, I want you to remain standing if you believe in it. Okay. Everybody remain standing. I was like, I want you to keep standing if you own a firearm that is yours, that you picked out, that your daddy didn't tell you, or that your husband didn't tell you you had to have. Like, you went and did your own research. Some people start sitting. Okay. Now I want you to keep standing if that gun is on you right now, not in your car and not at your house. It's in a purse with you at your table or on your body. A lot of people sit down. Okay. So now I'm like, okay, so if you're standing, I want you to remain standing if you've been to the range in the last 30 days to practice with your gun. Right now, there's only 2 people standing, and one of them is a dude, okay, that was there with his wife. And then I said, well, now I want you to remain standing. I said, and this question is not necessarily a deal breaker, but it's something you need to think about. I want you to remain standing if you've ever testified in a Senate, congressional, House, local hearing, anything that has to do with protecting the Second Amendment. You went and testified. Even if it was virtually, because you can do that now. Nobody's standing, okay? These are all the things that it takes for you to understand the Second Amendment, for you to appreciate the Second Amendment, for you to be ready, because physics dictates that nobody can adequately, the people who can adequately deal with a situation of duress are the people who are there. That is physics. Nobody's coming to save you. You have to understand the value of time. You don't get to just sing a song and all the people with the guns appear and they protect you. That's not how this works, okay? And so the second time that I did that line of questioning was at that panel that we did in Dallas. And the same thing happened. And when I was down to the last question about people, and there was over 100 people, there was like 120, 130 people in that room that all claimed to be conservative people who believe in the Second Amendment. And when I asked the last question, there was only 6 people standing. And then when I asked that question, there was only 1 person left standing. So these are the things, and it's a harsh reality. And somebody in the front row, like, they looked at their friend and they're like, man, she's coming at us like really hard in the paint. And I'm like, I am. Because you say this is activism, not actionism. Like, you're coming and you're socializing with people, but you're not really doing what it takes, right? So you're not going to be prepared when the person walks into the mall in Allen and starts shooting people up. I bet if more people in that mall were carrying, that shit would have ceased quicker, right? It's about how many lives can you save. Somebody's going to get hurt and somebody's going to get killed, because our reaction is almost never going to be, faster than their action unless our situational awareness is on point. So you have to be prepared to deal with the threat, and nobody's, like, a lot of people aren't prepared to deal with the threat. So how I got into it, and I'll kind of round this question out, I didn't ever want to do this. I didn't ever want to be testifying at hearings, but there was this gal named Rachel Malone, who was a director for Gun Owners of America, and she found me on social media back in 2018 and was basically like, I need you to testify at the gun rights hearings at Brookhaven College in front of our House representatives. And I was like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not a testifier. I don't know how to do that. And she begged me. She asked me to meet her at the IHOP. We met at IHOP at like 10 o'clock at night. She taught me how to testify. She was like, basically, don't write your speech until you get there. Like, you need to listen to what other people are saying so that you don't just regurgitate someone else's thought, and you need to come up with your own thought. So I went and listened to 6 hours of testimony at the Brookhaven College in front of the House representatives. I wrote my speech 15 minutes before my panel was called up. I testified after the Facebook and Instagram people, testified and were basically questioned by the House representatives on why they can't step on people's Fourth Amendment rights, okay, and like search people's DMs for stuff. I testified after the deputy director of the FBI, Danny Colson, who responded to Columbine. I testified after him, and I'll send you my speech. I mean, it was, I got 3 minutes. But after that, I was pissed off, because as I'm watching people testify at this hearing about our gun rights and why they're important and why we don't need any more gun control laws, there's representatives like Pancho Navarez, who had the largest contiguous district in Texas. And he's just basically like, like not even paying attention, being demeaning to people, just being a general asshole about our civil rights. Okay. And so I hit him pretty hard after the fact, because I found out from Connie Burton, who used to be one of our senators, and then she started a news media channel called The Texan. I found out that he got busted for cocaine possession at the Austin airport 2 months before that hearing, and he was still allowed to sit in a place of authority there. And so I slaughtered his ass in the media. I was like, basically, I was pissed off now. So now I'm like, I'm testifying at everything. Put me at everything. If this is the way that you're looking at your constituents and looking at the people of your districts, and you're saying, I don't care about your gun rights, I don't even want to pay attention, I'm done with you. So I was like, I'm writing an article on this asshole, and I'm going to call him out. Who's going to publish it? Nobody wanted to publish it. Everybody was trying to cover for this guy. Gun News Daily came out and said, we'll publish your article. And I slaughtered him in the media, and he resigned like 3 weeks after that. And I don't necessarily think it was because of my article. I think it was just, he was tired of, people were coming out of the woodwork and going, this isn't fair. How many decisions have you made on the Committee for Homeland Security while you did 4 lines of coke that morning? It's just not fair. So after that, that's how I got into the testifying part. Is I didn't want to do it. And then I felt guilty and felt like I needed to do it. And then I saw people who weren't giving effective testimony, and then it pissed me off. And now here I am.
It sounds way too familiar to my journey and how I got involved in policy. I didn't want to do it either. And sometimes you don't get to say no to your calling, right? And that's that takes a lot of courage. What year was that?
That was 2018. And that's what I told you before the show. I'm like, you need to listen to Dangerous Prayers, because after that, and I read that book in 2020, I think it was 2020. And I was like, am I really ready for this? Is this what I want to do? Because a lot of people will hate you when you start speaking truth to power. Even people in your own communities that say that they believe how you believe. They'll be like, oh, whoa, now we're going too far. This freedom thing, is it really worth it? And then we saw this firsthand during COVID. I didn't wear a mask at the grocery store. A lady spit on my car while I was putting my groceries in my car. And I was like, you are so lucky that you met 39-year-old Jerah and not 28-year-old Jerah or 25-year-old Jerah, because I'll whoop your ass in the middle of this parking lot. Okay. You are so lucky that right? Move on. And it's to your point. Like, that's the mindset that we have to have, is when is retaliation, or when is, defense or violence the answer, in the mental health space. And you've got to really have control of your emotions when you encounter people like that. And we saw a ton of this, during COVID. So the mental health aspect has got to be at the forefront. And like, what does that look like? And we have to start holding our own communities accountable when there's violence for no reason.
So one of the things that you did, I think I was super impressed by, because I do believe that the gun community has this like echo chamber, and a lot of people either duck out of having a tough conversation, or they just fall in line, right? Like, it's just so easy to fall in line. There's certain things you can kind of rallying cries that the gun community has. It's the same things, you know what I mean? Same phrases. But when Phoenix Ammo did the whole, if you click this box, are you a liberal or did you vote Democrat? And then if you click that box, it went straight to, we don't want to sell you ammo. And, it's funny. It was funny, right? But it wasn't really productive. I didn't think it was. And I remember Rob, because, Rob is not afraid to mix it up with somebody. So Rob's up there in the comments, but you came into the comments and you're like, I don't think this is it. This ain't the move, right? And I respected that, because I felt the same way. I was just like, and I went on there and I said my piece of how cool would it have been if you clicked that box and then it showed you how you can contribute as a liberal or a Democrat to helping the Second Amendment, right? Like, this is what you do, this is who you call, this is who you talk to and sit down. Because when Democrats and liberals are in power, the most important voices, I think, are like people like the LGO, Liberal Gun Club, liberal gun owners. Like, I think that they have a great voice. They can actually get the meetings with the people and actually explain to them and relate to them. So I just want to kind of give you your flowers on, me seeing that firsthand, where I was just like, she's not afraid to literally say anything or speak her mind, even if the whole damn comment section is falling in line. Like, this is awesome. Da, da, da. You're like, no, this isn't it.
I didn't agree with the move, but here's what you have to do. You have to you had to approach that from a lot of different angles. And I actually had an in-person conversation with Justin about that at Solutionary Summit
I did
uh,
too. Yeah.
in 2021, and he was super open to. And that's one thing about that guy is, he's going to do what he wants because it's his business, and why not? Like, he's going to do what he wants to do, and he has every right to do that. I felt like it could have been a teachable moment because I'm so tired of the First Amendment and the Second Amendment being party politics. Like, everybody should love the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. Everybody should. And, I was on a podcast yesterday called Say More Words with a really good friend of mine, Tamika Taylor. And I said, when we are defending rights, which your rights trump a lot of stuff. Okay, you got to have that mindset, and you got to understand that your rights are literally the most important thing. Freedom over everything. Okay, when we are defending fundamental rights, we're often doing it in the midst of someone's most egregious pain. And there's a big mental health aspect to that. Okay, and so I have to so when I went through this in my early 20s. I was raped when I was 16. And I spent a lot of my teenage years and a lot of my 20s thinking all men are trash. Okay. So let's flip this. What if my brother was a victim of the gun? What if somebody shot and killed my brother? Well, now I can go down the path of, we got to take all guns away from everybody. And that's what people do. When the gun affects you negatively, you want to take it away from everybody, but you're forgetting that it's a fundamental right. It's a fundamental right. It's important. And it's actually a national security issue if you want to take it to the highest level possible, right? You go back to Pearl Harbor and you figure out why we didn't get invaded more inland is because the Japanese knew that almost every single person in America, they weren't just going to have to deal with our military. They had to deal with us too. Behind every blade of grass is a gun. That's what they said. Okay. So people aren't understanding that because they're in the middle of their most egregious pain and they're letting their emotions overshadow facts. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that for a minute. Okay. Because you're going to be emotional about something like that, but you got to get past that. Right. So for me, 1 and 2 is not party politics. Liberals need to understand the value of the Second Amendment. Everybody needs to understand the value of it. So I saw that as, what Justin did with Phoenix Ammunition. I'm like, this could be a really teachable moment. And he chose to not go down that path. And that was his choice. And he was willing to make it. And he had every right to make it. I just didn't agree with it. And so, I didn't really want to be on the bandwagon. And I told him that in person. So I think if you're going to be a keyboard warrior, you should also have the guts to sit down and talk to somebody, about that in person. So I still hold that belief today, but Justin and I are really great friends now. And so, and that's a big part of it and that's a big part of like being friends with people like Rob too, is I don't agree with him all the time. But can we go, okay, agree to disagree and move on and still like work together and like make progress through the space. And I think people especially people who have a large platform. Phoenix has a really large platform on Twitter. Rob has a really large platform. Like it does take guts to disagree with people who are seeing more than you. And it's just, but you got to have that, right? But you also have to be open to your mind being changed too. And my mind has been changed on a lot of things over the years that I've been working with Rob and other instructors. And so you also have to have the guts to go back and go, I think maybe I was wrong about that and I should reconsider. There's a lot to it.
Being able to be non-attached about your ideas is critical to self-growth. And the first step toward that is recognizing that you have ideas first, right? And a lot of people think they have beliefs and they think they know what they're saying. And that's fine. That's a good first step. But behind that is, why do you have those beliefs? Why do you have those ideas? Where do they come from? And so often it's somebody else put it into your head and you never bother to examine it and claim it as your own. So when you conflate what you think with who you are and what you think gets challenged, it sends a signal to the brain that you yourself are getting challenged and you're not. It's just an idea. So we want to hold our ideas loosely so we can change our minds. However, if we have really thoroughly examined our ideas and our beliefs and we can speak them, then we don't worry about them being challenged because we've examined them. And we can just hold them loosely and say, that's fine. You disagree. I disagree with you. I don't have to feel one way or the other about it. I don't have to have an ego battle or a power struggle over it. We still be friends. And I think too often people get so involved in conflating what they think with who they are that we lose friendships over simple fundamental disagreements that don't have to have that effect. I mean, it, you don't need to be all on the same page with every single thing to send a clear message. Mike's saying all the time that we need people from different perspectives to advance the entire message, because there's reasons and value in all of that presentation. I think trying to change everybody's mind all at once is futile, first of all, and it's just burning energy. But also, you got to be careful not to think that you're the be all end all of whatever the concept should be too. That's very, very arrogant. It's very egotistical, and I think it does more harm than good when you have a one dimensional presentation on any topic. Good for you.
Well, and you hit the nail on the head. We're so limited by our own perspective and our own experiences that you have to get out. And you have to be willing to get out and experience other things. And I think a self defense education is pertinent to allowing you to do that, right? Like I loved linking up with Maj. I did a Black Guns Matter for him in Dallas. I was honestly shocked that he wanted me to do it, frankly, because I'm white. And he was like, that's not the point. Like we have to learn, from everyone. And one of the things that going through that class and listening to the things that he had to say, and then going to dinner, we took a small group to dinner. It was the first time in my life. I was in my late 30s, and it was the first time in my life that I had ever been the minority at the table. It was the first time in my life. And so just listening to people's experiences, and I think, yes, I think some people play the race card a little too loosely, the Black card a little too loosely. But I think it's also, if you're smart and you have the ability to discern, it's pretty easy to tell when that's happening versus when somebody had a legitimate experience. And so I asked Maj, we were walking to our cars after dinner, and I was like, hey, I'm going to ask you a question. And I felt comfortable enough to ask this question because I didn't think he'd make me seem foolish. I was like, do you think that having a self-defense education makes you less racist? And he was like, absolutely. He was like, because you would totally be willing to sit across from someone that the media or social or society is deemed scary, right? Like, so for a long time, it was people with tattoos, right? Like, right. For a long time, it was Black people. For a long time, it was, people that society deemed scary because they didn't like dive in and get to know these people. And so I think that honestly, if we're really going to speak frankly, and I'm not a clinician, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a counselor, but I think a self-defense education is pertinent for your mental health. I think it breeds responsibility and promotes accountability, and introduces you to people that you would never sit down in a room with before. I think it heals a lot of your sort of conclusions that you drew without having, a logical perspective, and it'll take you places that you've never been. And I think that's what I think a lot of people don't want to say that. I have a nonprofit called WADE. It's the Women's Awareness and Defense Endeavor. And I take women out of abusive relationships. I will physically go to your house and pack your shit for you. And that fool that beats you every day will sit on the couch and watch me. That's what we do. And we rescue 10 to 15 women a year. We've been doing that since 2019. And out of all, and it takes months of talking to these women and convincing them to leave and showing them that. So it's not just about finding them a job and them getting independence and living, by themselves. The missing piece that nobody wants to talk about is the self-defense part of it, right? So you got to get them into counseling, and you got to get their mind right, and you got to get them healed up. But then you got to teach them that they can protect themselves and they can protect their children, and they never have to succumb to that kind of abuse again. And that is what keeps them away. So ask me how many women have gone back to their abuser since 2019, average of 14 to 15 women a year that we rescue.
How many women have gone back to their abuser since you've rescued them?
One. So, but all the women's shelter people, okay, all the people that I've encountered, they say you can't put guns in the hands of abused women. Absolutely, you can. You 100%
can, and you should. You can, and you should.
But you have to. But it's a process, and you have to couple it with things that they also need. They have to get counseling, they have to get therapy, they have to understand money management, they have to get parenting classes. Like, they have to do all of these things, and then you can do that, and it's actually pretty golden.
It starts with self-efficacy. You have to be emotionally, psychologically stable and know yourself well enough to be able to handle that tool when when you decide to carry it. You can't just arm people who are still on their heels and reeling and don't know which end is up, because that's when bad things happen. When you form the foundation of self-efficacy, when you learn how to when you teach somebody to know how to be assertive, not aggressive, not passive, but assertive, when you build self-efficacy, you can augment that self-efficacy with more tools. And one tool is firearms, right? But another tool might be business ownership. Another tool might be community connectivity. When you start building these things that then feed into the self-efficacy, it becomes a feedback loop, and that's all they ever want to know now. And then they become a bad MF. And when they walk into a room, you know who's in charge. That you don't mess with that person. They're unflappable because they're confident. It has nothing to do with the firearm that may or may not be on their body, and yet it does, because they had to get to that point in order to wield it appropriately. Just like we don't put firearms in the hands of children and just let them go do what they want. They're not developed. They haven't anchored themselves yet to know, to discern when is appropriate to use, deploy, and not. And there's that old adage that says the best fight that you ever get in is the one you don't have. Knowing how to deploy skills in advance of the defensive tool is absolutely critical, but you can't do that if you're living in a life of abuse and neglect and violence and suffering. So yeah, we have to restore that first. But back to my original point, yes, we can and should arm women, and we can and should arm women with all the other knowledge that you listed off: the financial literacy, the self-efficacy, the employment, parenting skills, all that stuff, because that's what makes a good, well-rounded person who then doesn't succumb to violence and abuse later on. I didn't know you did that. That's really, really cool, man.
How'd you get into that?
We There was a woman in a mom's group that I was in on Facebook. So I'm in some of these moms groups because when they have safety questions and stuff, they'll tag me. And I have a lot of moms that are my clients. And there was a woman who had found out this was her second husband. So she was Egyptian, and she was basically sold as a young bride to a man that brought her to America, and had to be married to her for a certain amount of time, and then divorced her because he was in love with someone else. And they had 2 children out of that marriage. She remarried a man and found out, and sometimes that's the snap for women, is when you start abusing their children, right? They will take the abuse, but sometimes when you start abusing the children, that sparks something in them that makes them want to get out. And so she found out, and then had the guts to post in this group. She was like, I found out that my husband is in jail. So she did everything right? She called the cops, reported the abuse. They took him to jail. She was like, but he's going to get out on bail. So found out that he was sexually abusing her children from her first marriage. Okay. And she was like, so he's in jail, but he's going to be bailed out. He's going to bail himself out. She was like, so I went and bought this gun. She bought a little Bursa. And she was like, I need somebody to teach me how to use it quickly. And so this post was made on a Sunday morning. I had her in the range on Monday morning. And he called her from jail and threatened her. He came to the house and threatened her when he got out of jail. She had to call the police, but she was ready because she had learned how to use this gun. Okay. And so I thought to myself, and then she said, like, so she couldn't afford the house without him. So she had to go and move, right? So when he got out, the house is his, right? So the police would not help her or supervise that move. That we have, excuse my French, we have shit on our police so much that they can no longer, from a liability perspective, deal with these domestic situations effectively. Okay. So, and I'm not a bootlicker. Okay. I'm all about holding bad police accountable, but this is what we've come to. So I went over there and I helped her move her stuff. And the the presence of someone else, like predators can tell, abusers can tell that when they're in the presence of somebody that's not going to put up with that shit, they're a lot less likely to take action and abuse that person, especially in front of you. So
Absolutely.
so I moved her stuff out, and she moved in with a friend. And so it was after that I was like, I who else? Who else is sitting in this mess that can't get out because no one will go and help them, physically go and help them. So once again, it's got to be actionism versus activism. We can raise all the money that we want for battered women's shelters and things like that, but if they're not willing to get out, if they don't have any help physically walking out the door, what's the point? What's the point?
Yep.
And so I started getting referrals. Police would send me referrals. And I would work on them. So sometimes I'll call them at work, if they have a job, and I'll try to convince them to leave. We got to be very careful how we communicate with these women, because, just communicating about it can get them, physically harmed. I went just right before I went to Alaska with Kevin Dixie, to take his Evolve rifle class. I had a woman I'd been working on for 7 months to get out, and she was finally like, I'm ready to go. And she had so many perks, right? She already had a job, she already had income, but the thing is, it was going into his account, right? So I had to scoop her up from work. We had to communicate this with her work. Her coworker is the one that referred her to me. We had to get her a bank account opened. We had to pick up the kids from school. So the good thing is no custody arrangement, because these kids were from a previous marriage. Okay. I had to get her into a crisis shelter so this is like 2 days before I'm about to leave for Alaska. I had to do all these things, and he had to not know where she was. And I had to make sure that she had escorts to and from work, because he knows where she works, but he doesn't know where she is. Okay. So we had to turn off all the location services on her cell phone. We had to do all these things. Okay. And now she's like, in just the, week or two that she's been in this crisis shelter, like, she's thriving. And so she'll be in her own apartment next month. And then we start her gun. She's already in counseling. The kids are already in counseling through MHMR. And so we've got to get her self-defense, stuff started in September, once we kind of evaluate where her mind is at and can she handle it. So, if you're not physically willing to go and save people, what's the point? Somebody
So
has to do that.
you referenced you keep saying we've saved. Who else are you working with? Who are you have partners or volunteers or what?
I think I'm a one woman show in Wade, but I have other organizations that I work with as far as like getting them jobs and clothing and resume translation and all that kind of stuff. But I'm a one woman show as far as like nobody wants to do that.
Yeah. Have you ever had, like, has someone ever kind of turned the anger towards you as the person who's helping? No.
And I'm not saying that it wouldn't happen. I'm not saying that this isn't dangerous. I'm just saying that when you walk into a room and you say, I'm helping her move out and I'm armed, they're weak. For the most part, they are weak. What are they going to do? Right? Like, I mean, sometimes that's how I present it. Sometimes I'm friendly. Sometimes it's a friendly thing. Sometimes it's they try to cover it up with humor and friendly and, oh, this isn't as bad as you think it is. And then sometimes they just sit on the couch and stare at you. And they're in their head, they're trying to make their next move. Like, what is their next move going to be? But if you want to save them, you have to get them out, right? So when I say we, I mean people in the saving women's space and people in the saving kids space. I've had several conversations with, the president of Operation Underground Railroad. Sound of Freedom was made by Tim Ballard, who started that organization, about, how we continue to move the needle forward and like kick in doors and save babies. Like, people have to be willing to do that. And it's a huge calling, Jake. It's a huge calling. But so when you pray for your calling and so if God tells you your calling is to kick in doors and save babies, your calling is to physically go into people's homes and take the women out who are getting their asses beat every day, you better be ready, because that's your calling. What are you going to do? How are you going to look? And here's the domino effect. How are you going to explain that to your family? How are you going to explain that to your friends? How is that going to affect your dating life? How do you think that dudes that sit across from a dinner table with me that are interested in me react to me going, well, sometimes I have to go into people's houses and take them out of abusive relationships?
No, it's so impressive hearing you talk like that. It really, I mean, it's inspiring. I do draw a lot of inspiration from a lot of what you do in your posts. So this is a different chapter altogether. But I want to answer something that I think people may be asking is how does that happen, right? You got this violent, horrible, ugly person who's been doing all these bad things, and then just the appearance of another person, shuts it down. And my short answer to that is people who engage in that type of activity usually are dealing with a cluster B personality disorder that's either narcissistic, histrionic, borderline, or antisocial. And those personality disorders, long-standing pattern of uh, bad behavior that doesn't work for them, right? So we'll just center on narcissism for example. But the commonality among all four of those is massive, massive, massive insecurity that gets masked over by outward appearance of competence. And usually that outward appearance of competence is false, it's contrived. And the reason that narcissists, for example, don't do well with confrontation is because they're used to bludgeoning their way through to get what they want. Now, sometimes it's not always actual physical violence. Sometimes it's words, right? Usually they're very, very intelligent people because they live in their frontal lobe. And meanwhile, their limbic brain, which is where the emotions are, is on full tilt because they're living in shame or they have deep insecurities, right? Okay, so what ends up happening is that facade fails. It melts away when somebody looks them straight in the eye and says, "You're full of crap, and you're going to sit right there, and this is going to happen," because they're used to control and power over the person that they've put in the subordinate position. They're not used to doing it to the perfect stranger, which is why they write bad reviews on Yelp when they don't get the burger cooked the way that they want. They're not actually going to go in and ask the manager to make change. They're just going to bellyache about it and make it all about themselves, and then they go forward with their belligerence, blasting everybody about how their bad experience was this thing or the other thing, and then shifting blame away from themselves and their own inability to tolerate distress to the person who caused the distress. It's the manager, it's the cook, it's the wife, it's the customer service agent, it's whatever it is other than them. And they have this long-standing pattern of leaving a trail of destruction and wreckage that they never take accountability for because it's always somebody else until somebody steps up and says, "You're not going to do that at my agency. You're not going to do that in my restaurant. You're not going to do that here with me present." And then they go, "Well, I don't know who you are. And I've spent a lifetime calculating my angles to get away with what I want." They can't yell their way out of it because they know you won't tolerate it. They can't belittle you because they know you won't tolerate it. And so you're left with nothing. They can't do anything. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, they could also, snap and go ballistic and violent, but you've announced that you're armed. So it's like, game on, right? I've just showed you all my cards. And that's one of the tricks that the cluster B types pull is that they will do a reversal and they'll make you think that they know more than you do. But if you are transparent, you are authentic, it gives them nowhere to go. You've dropped the rope and there is nothing to tug on anymore. So sometimes all it takes is courage, but you really got to know yourself in order to confront these people. And that's how it happens. A lot of people wonder, how is this possible? How does Jerah go in there and do this thing? Well, the how is the abuser doesn't know what to do. She's a wild card, and they've spent a lifetime trying to calculate all the wild cards out of their picture so they don't have to deal with them. And then when a wild card comes in, they just make excuses. It wasn't me, it was the manager. Screw that girl. I never liked her anyway, right? It's never about them. So they'll just leave you behind too and chalk it up to, yeah, the bitch came in and pulled my wife out. What'd you do? There's nothing I could do. So that's fine. Leave them to their narrative. You did the right thing. You're saving people, and that's really, really special. It's very cool. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I think when you go into these homes, you do have the Spirit of God protecting you. He comes before you, he goes behind you, he stands with you, and people discern that and they pick up on it too, and they know not to mess with the person who's protected.
Well, the biggest part of good Christianity, honestly, is its fruitfulness. And that's, you can be fruitful in a variety of ways, but I think part of being fruitful is speaking truth and being actionable. And uh, it's not about you. So like when you talk about the Christine Kane says this really the best way, and she has a nonprofit called A21. So she deals with human trafficking, like that's what A21 does, and it's a worldwide organization. And she's the head of it, and she talks about fruitfulness, and she's like, it's not about you, like you're saved. Okay, it's taking up your mat and walking and being actionable is not about you because you're saved. The devil can't get to you. It's about all the souls that you would touch with your action, that you are taking out of hell and into heaven, right? And so how many um, suicides has Operation Underground Railroad prevented by saving these kids and getting them into correct aftercare? How many prostitutes has A21 prevented by taking these sexually abused kids out of human trafficking and setting them on a correct path? Do you see what I'm saying? So for me, what I think is, how many productive moms am I helping God to create by taking them out of abusive homes, right? And like showing the kids it can be done, right? It's a hand up and not a hand out. But people talk about it all the time, but they never do anything about it. And so sometimes what change looks like and what protecting people looks like isn't always just donating to the cause. That's really great. And like, so when I do money raises, I don't do money raises all throughout the year. When a woman is ready to go, that's when I get on the internet and go, hey, we need to get her some groceries. We need to get her into this crisis shelter. We're going to need a little bit of money to like get her on her feet, and people come through, but I only do it when there's a need. And so it goes back to, that's a really great thing for you to do. But sometimes the thing that has to be done is the going there, the physically going there. And not a lot of people want to do that.
Yep. It's tough. It's tough, and you got to get out of your own ego space, and you got to challenge your own presumptions about what it means. And a lot of that just comes with fear, and fear means that there's a threat or a danger present, and oftentimes that threat or danger is ideological. It's the belief system that's getting challenged.
Well,
I'm going to have to let go of what I think I know to do what is right or what I'm called to do, and that is scary until you start stepping into it, and then it just becomes, the way.
it becomes a little bit easier, but you also have to step away from your own safety, and you have to think to yourself, and this is where faith makes a big play here. This is where faith goes really hard in the paint, because it forces you to think about what you are willing to die for. What are you truly willing to die for? And that makes your mindset spin around, because I'm not willing to die or get into a confrontation with somebody because they spit on my car in a parking lot. I don't care about that person. Go away. Okay. I'm willing to die for a mom who has no way out of an abusive relationship and can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm willing to die for kids who are being sexually abused by their stepfather. I'm willing to go in and die for that. And I think more people need to start asking themselves that question. I'm willing to speak up for it and not worry about what you think about me, because they are more important to me than your opinion. Your opinion is the lowest form of knowledge that you possess. It requires no evidence or accountability. It's just how you feel. It's the lowest form of knowledge that you have. So why would I give a shit about your opinion when so many more important things are happening over here with women and kids that need to see that somebody's going to physically take action for them?
You're touching on something that speaks to a values hierarchy, and it's a foundational principle that, unfortunately, America has shifted so far away from foundational principles and anchoring that we've lost the ability to stand on things. All we've known is deconstruct, right? We deconstruct everything, but we never construct anything in its place. That's what postmodernism has done to us, i.e., woke, right? Woke is postmodern deconstructionism, where everything is made up, and you can just create your own reality and become God of your own universe. Okay, well, how do you have values if you don't know how to stand on things? When you have those values, then you can take action from them. And then opinions don't really matter unless they're opinions of people you trust, obviously, and that's a different topic. But you touched on death, right? And I think that culturally, America and the West writ large has lost touch with the idea of death as a part of life. So we're all going to die. Nobody talks like that. Western medicine has told us that not only are we not going to die, we'll probably just won't get sick. And if we do get sick, something's going to cure us. Um, and that got flipped on its head when COVID rolled through and killed a bunch of people because it was a novel virus and our bodies weren't ready to fight it off. And we were like, oh no, tragic death of a man in his 90s. It's like that's not tragic. That's normal and natural. But we don't want to talk like that. So, in order to visit the topic of death, we have to wrap our arms around it, the idea that we are going to die someday. How do we want to die? Do we want to die with dignity? Do we want to die on behalf of somebody? And if so, what are we dying for? That requires the values that we no longer possess. We don't have any anchoring. We don't have any morals. We don't have any ethics. We don't have anything to stand on. But if we do, we can make determinations about what's worth dying for. And we let go of the idea that human life itself, on like my life walking this earth, is the most valuable thing. But parenthetically, it's to me. It's the most valuable thing to me because that's what we've been told. That's what we've been programmed to think. It's like, don't die early, live long, accumulate crap. Like, well, yeah, but if I die early on behalf of somebody else so that they can live, that's pretty special. That's pretty powerful. It's pretty profound. But we just don't even talk about it. We just don't even endeavor it. So I appreciate you bringing that up because it might be an opportunity for us to recenter ourselves and go, you know what? Maybe the life on this earth, walking in flesh and blood, isn't the most important thing. Maybe the most important thing is living in valor for others. And then to what extent? And then if you're married, you got children, you got extended family, you might run a business like I do. If I die, then what? Somebody has to do that work. Somebody has to, step into that role. Do I care? What's my value structure? And is it aligned with my employees, my coworkers, my wife, my children, if they're old enough to understand such things? You better be able to share that stuff. You better be able to stand on it collectively so that, if you're out doing this type of activity, or Jake's out, writing letters and testifying to the woeful state of mental health care in Nevada, and he gets lambasted in the media for it, will my wife care? Will my employees care? Or are they aligned? Do we have values that we can stand on? We all in agreement that some things are worth fighting for, and we're not just going to tuck our chins while abuse is perpetrated on us, whether it be from an actual abuser in a domestic violence situation or abuse from the government that just keep passing laws that restricts care access. We have to have those discussions. Hopefully, this sparks some of those discussions. You're a powerful presence. I really appreciate your work.
Thank you. Thank you. I love doing it and I hate doing it at the same time. And
Yeah,
I
I hear
think
that.
anybody
Yeah, I
would,
totally feel that.
yeah, because and I'll kind of round it out with this because I do have to hop in a couple of minutes. But I would love to do part two because I think that we've just scratched the surface on what we can talk about, especially in women's spaces, in the Second Amendment community, because we need more women talking about freedom, and we need more women talking about the submission, and how we put that into marriages. The having that talk in marriages is very important. And sometimes I find myself sort of mediating marriages, to a degree, especially when husbands are like, I really want my wife to get training, but she doesn't want to do it. And there's a fear factor there. And I do want to touch on that in a different episode and kind of talk about, ways to deal with that. But, getting back to, the love and hate, it's like two horns on the same goat for me, because it's very frustrating sometimes to have conversations with ignorant people who are not willing. And ignorant is not super bad. Ignorant is not stupid.
It's
Ignorant is
just
not.
a lack of knowledge.
Yeah. And so, but sometimes it is frustrating to have those conversations with ignorant people who are not willing to walk down this path of reality and science, where they have to understand that they have to be their own first responder and they have to be a great ambassador for their safety if they want any kind of chance. Because the social experiment that we saw, that was COVID, shows you that there are areas where, people of authority will take advantage of your meekness if you let them do it. And if you want to live a life worth living, quality of life is so important. And so if you want to live a life worth living, sometimes you have to be willing to speak truth to power and go, this isn't just. This isn't right. We can't collapse people's ways of providing for their families and just eating, right? We can't drive people to suicide, over something like this. So I understood it in the very beginning for the first 2 or 3 weeks because we didn't really know what we were dealing with. But as the data started to come in and some of that data that they were trying to hide from us, I just went right back to work. I was like, we're not, I'm healthy. And, that's a whole other part of an episode that we can talk about is, why your physical health is very important to your self-defense. And I'll just be very frank about it. There's a lot of fatties that come through my classes and, somebody's got to tell them, look, I get it. Some people have limitations that they can't help, right? Every obese person isn't obese because, they're irresponsible. Sometimes there's medical things that we don't know anything about yet. But, if you want to be serious about the self-defense game, then you got to be serious about going to the gym and you got to be serious about, working on yourself physically and mentally and not just, I can clear my gun out of a holster and point it at you. That's not the end all be all of the game. Sometimes you're going to have to run with that gun. Sometimes you're going to have to take cover and concealment with that gun. Sometimes you're going to have to physically fight somebody before you draw the gun because they got the drop on you. Like there's all these things that you have to take into consideration. So this self-defense game is so much more than just the gun. It's your mind, body, and spirit, and it's your discernment and your wisdom and tact. And, we got to start touching on those things too.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I love talking about this kind of stuff with people. I love getting the content out there. You never know who you're touching, even on an Instagram reel, as silly as I've thought that's been in the past. You just don't know who's listening to you and who goes, man, that kind of makes sense. Maybe I need to do that, or maybe I need to listen a little bit more to it. And I think what you guys are doing is really important because there is a way to tackle the mental health aspect of life without taking people's ability to defend themselves away. And you got to be able to do that. And that was a huge issue. I'll round it out with this. That was a big issue with me a few years ago is, I was going through some family things. I was going through some relationship things. I was going through some mental things. And sometimes you have that thought of maybe it would just be easier if I wasn't here. And it's very hard for people in the gun game, especially influencers, especially instructors, people whose livelihood depends on the gun, cops. They have a really hard time finding someone that they can adequately speak to about this that isn't going to go, okay, well, maybe we just need to take your firearms away because that's detrimental to some people's lives, and they need to be able to safely talk about, and have an action plan from a professional, but still be able to, and some of these people, a lot of these people are men. A lot of these people are men who are heads of families who, you can't take away their ability to be a protector. That would just make it worse. So, I love what you guys are doing and just being a safe space for people to talk about the hard stuff and go, hey, we want you to be able to, we want you to be able to keep your guns and we want you to be able to keep your ability to protect people and yourselves. We just want you to be able to talk to us. And I love that.
Thanks, man. Can't let you go without Mike asking this final question, though.
Yeah, Jerah, it's been awesome. I love learning. I mean, just the fact that we discovered that you're a superhero today, we didn't know about that, has been awesome. You stay ready. You're ready for anything. Christmas. You're ready. Like you can just go right into Christmas.
Thanks, Mike. I thought that was in the trust tree.
Nobody watches the YouTube channel. It's fine.
It's in the trust tree.
No, but seriously, it's been a pleasure. We'll definitely have you back on. I'm sure Jake's cool with that, right? Like, let's go part 2 because
Yes.
we were just getting going. How do you tend to your mental health?
I have a counselor here. She actually is a gun student of mine, and she does some really tough stuff. She takes people's kids away. Sometimes when it needs to be done. And how I met her was she came to me as a gun student. She was referred to me by another gun student. She took a bandito's kid away from him in court. So she's a counselor that testifies in family court hearings. And she took a bandito's kid away from him, and he threatened to kill her. And so we're both we're both redheads. We're both pretty fiery. And she's just very real. And she's someone that I can talk to about things that, I wouldn't say to other people, or like thoughts that I'm having, that I wouldn't tell other people. So she's a really great sounding board for me. Staying healthy. I mean, you would be surprised at how your mental health is so much less polluted by how you eat. Not putting, junk in your body, processed foods in your body. I lowered my alcohol intake significantly. I did 75 hard last year, which was incredible. It was the first time in my adult life that I didn't drink for 75 days. And so, body composition totally changed. Felt so good not to drink. I still do a little bit. I don't really have more than a couple. And, I'm a huge bourbon collector. So, I gave you a lot of shit for drinking Jack in Vegas, Mike. I don't know if you remember that, but
I do.
I'm kind of a snot about my whiskey. So, doing that, getting to the gym, people just, man, I don't know why they're so gym averse, but man, throwing up weight and getting that out is awesome. I have a little boxing setup at my house. Sometimes you just got to hit shit, and sometimes it can't be people. All that stuff just kind of accumulating together, and just keeping God as the center of the focus. Getting to church as often as I can when I'm not traveling. But I listen to it too. I have some really good pastors, and I try to seek out faith leaders who stood up to COVID. That was a big deal for me. I want to listen to what they have to say. I want the faith leaders that kept their churches open, and that stood up for freedom. I think we need more faith leaders talking about that, and more faith leaders talking about what the Bible says about self-defense, because there's 3 really solid places that it talks about it. And we can talk about that on the next episode, because I actually gave a talk about that at a Christian women's summit one time. And we talked about what God says about it, and it's Bible and it's there for you. So that's how I deal with it. That's how I keep, the focus. And, who knows? I may incorporate you guys into the mix too.
Yeah.
Love
Good
it.
for you. Glad to hear all that stuff. 75 hard sounded, well, hard.
Let me tell you, it wasn't the drinking that was the hardest part. It was fitting in the second workout.
Yeah.
Because you already had it that morning. Now they expect you to do another one later on in the day. And you're like, I'm just trying to go eat Mexican food with my friends. Okay. Like, what do you mean I got to do another workout? And it had to be outside. One of the workouts had to be outside, and it was a hot Texas summer. So it was but anyway, guys, I want to do it again for sure. I'll see you guys, and I'll be in Reno in December. I'm going to take the IDS class again. So I'll see if you guys are around. I'll see you in December, but I got to hop, but love you guys. Mean it, and want to do it again.
Thank you. Thank you on behalf of our team and our platinum sponsors, the names of which you've heard throughout the course of this podcast, and on behalf of all the Walk the Talk family. Thanks for tuning in. Share it around. We wish you all great mental wellness. Bye-bye.